for leading us through our flow today. And thank you to all of us, to all of you who've joined us today. This is a time for us to really focus in, and to rejoice. There's a psalm that I really like that says, this is the day that Spirit has created, and we get to rejoice and we get to be glad in it. So this is your day. This is your day to celebrate. This is your day to have joy and to enjoy. And it's so interesting today that the Zoom platform was down. The free conference line platform was down when we were scheduled to get started at 10:30. And before, back in the day, I used to think, well, it's, maybe this is something God's trying to do. And then I realized everything that happened is about me taking an inner look. How did I respond to this? How did I feel about this? How was I able to shift? What was my response? And so whenever something happens, really quickly, we get to go in that moment. Am I capable of handling this moment? Can I be creative in this moment? Do I just need to be peaceful in this moment? Am I overreacting in this moment? Whatever it is, whatever the experience, especially when there is a change in our plans or in our routine or with our habits, with our schedule, just when the unexpected occurs. How do I respond? And I love these opportunities that life presents us in this human experience as divine beings to see where we are. It's so powerful. It's so meaningful. These occurrences are not menial, they're meaningful. And so I hope that you were able to then maybe just ask yourself a couple questions right in the midst of our technical difficulties today, which I am very happy that it wasn't on us, that it was actually the platforms that were having issues. But here we are, we're together. You are way makers. You showed up. I'm sure there are others that had some scheduled conflicts and then weren't able to circle back at the 11:30 hour. But for those of you who are here, I just thank you for being here. I know that it will be, and it has been already, a blessing to your life. There's so many things going on right now that's so important that you sow into your spiritual well-being. They're asking us to take all these precautions as it pertains to the COVID-19, and we have to social distance and wearing the mask and washing our hands multiple times, more than we ever had before, so that we can protect our physical self. Well, you know what? There are viruses all around that is endeavoring to, that may seek to harm or affect us emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. And so we have to be just as vigilant. So we got to give our minds, our emotional self, all the good things that it needs. Our spiritual self, we got to continue to build our treasure chest. It's more difficult to respond when you're not prepared. So the more you sow into yourself, you are building up yourself. So when the unexpected occurs, you are not flustered, you are not overwhelmed by it, but you say, you know what, I'm prepared and I can respond to this moment. So times like these, when you're able to come into a spiritual space and you're able to sow into your spiritual, emotional, mental well-being, is so incredibly important. So I hope that you really took in the meditation today. I hope that you in the affirmation today, and that you're going to continue to sow into your spiritual, emotional, psychological well-being. So important for you. So right before I begin the teaching, I'm hearing a little bit of background noise. So I'm going to give everyone on the call just another opportunity. Please check your phones, your computers, your tablets. Make sure they are muted, because we are recording the call. We want to make sure that we have a clear recording for those who are going to listen or watch on the playback. So thank you so much for doing that. And again, welcome to Real Life. I got to tell you, I love this community and I love that you're joining us today. So this morning, May 17th, yes, we are at May 17th, 2020. We are concluding a 3-part series entitled The Death of a God. The Death of a God. Part 1 was, we talked about the God of favorites. Last Sunday, we talked about the God of requirements. And today we're going to talk about the God of judgments. And I think it's important for me to kind of give this caveat. I used to do this before every single teaching that I did because I thought it was important, especially coming out of traditions where it seemed like the message, the word coming out from the pulpit or from those in authority was absolute and final. And so, especially when it's coming from the podium, from the holy place, from the sacred place, it was asking questions and having doubts and raising those questions were resisted, and we were cautioned against that. And so I like to give this caveat because, you know, anytime anyone dares to cross the sacred boundaries of our faith, to ask questions, to consult our doubts, it can feel threatening, especially to those in power, and sometimes even to ourselves. Even the simple inquiries can be deemed blasphemous. And, you know, there was a time in our history when the mere asking of certain faith-related questions could literally get one killed. So there was a prohibition against examination, a resistance to the mere asking of questions. The rejection of inquiry was elevated. It elevated ignorance to a desirable attribute. But as any other living thing, you are in a constant process of evolution. And it is a process, as long as you live, it's a process that never ends. And as a spiritual leader, one who has the attention and respect of people seeking to know God as they evolve along their life's journey, I do embrace and take on that role with immense seriousness. But simultaneously, I am acutely aware that I am not their voice of authority. I'm not your voice of authority. And I reject any attempt to be looked upon as such. Rather, I see myself as a facilitator, and anyone sharing, especially when it comes to spiritual work, a facilitator, a clearer of paths, which allows people the freedom to explore, to ask questions, to embrace their doubts, and to ultimately learn to trust the authority of their own voice. Therefore, this is the caveat. Anything that I teach is for your consideration. It is for you to try on and decide if it fits. Does it work for me? And it is this freedom, with this freedom in mind, that I continue our series on the death of a God. And so it's an invitation that I extend to you. I extend this invitation for you to reconsider what you think about God. I extend an invitation for you to consider the ideas that you have of God, that you've been taught about God. And it's literally that. It's an invitation. And if you've ever gotten an invitation, whether it's a hard copy by mail or a soft copy invitation, they have some categories there for you to respond. You can respond yes or no or maybe. And so that's what you get to do with this. It's an invitation, and you get to consider it. You get to try it on and say, yes, I see that, and this really resonates with me, or no, that's not for me, or maybe, you know what, I still have some questions. And that's why we have Real Talk Extended, where we create a forum for people to ask questions and to chat about what we've just heard, and without judgment, just that space of freedom. And so you have that invitation today. So with that in mind, let us turn to what I'm going to be focusing on in part 3 of the death of a God. Let us look at this particular God, the God of judgment. As I said in part 1, we talked about the God of favorites. Part 2, we discussed the God of requirements. And today we're going to look at the God of judgment. And we do have recordings. So if you've missed any of these teachings, we'll be happy to send them out to you. So again, I'm going to ask you, because I'm hearing some background noise, please check your phones. Make sure they are muted. Please make sure they're muted. Okay. I'm not sure if our host can actually mute all, but for those of you, just take a look at your phones and please mute them. So let's dig right in. Let's talk about the God of judgment. The God of judgment, this God, is seen throughout the entire biblical text, and it remains with us today. Beginning with Adam and Eve's failure, and subsequently them being cursed by God, right? So we see the God of judgment there. The destruction of almost every living thing on the earth by a great flood. Most of you grew up hearing the story of Noah and his ark. God destroyed every living thing except what was on the ark. And God did this God did this because of man's displeasing behavior to God. Within the biblical text, we see the God of judgment upon the Israelites, quote unquote, God's chosen people. They were enslaved. They were enslaved by the Egyptians. They were enslaved by the Babylonians. And not for 5, 10, 15 years. They were enslaved for hundreds of years. And we see that, and the prophets would say, the reason for your enslavement had to do with your disobedience to God's laws. And of course, the whole of humanity facing ultimate judgment, right? A looming hell due to our souls born in perfection. That we are all born with a stain. Our soul has this inner stain. We were born with this imperfection, and this stain, this imperfection in our souls cause separation from God. We know this as that big 3-letter word, sin. I've been taught about this concept since I was 6 years old, the concept of sin, the concept of this born imperfection, this stain upon humanity's soul, each individual. And again, all of these things happening, right? The flood, Adam and Eve being tossed out of this wonderful paradise that they were living in, all of humanity being, except for a few chosen people, being wiped out by this great flood, captivities of people, even the enslavement of Black people was justified by using scripture, by using the biblical text, that this was indeed the will of God, the okayness of God with this kind of enslavement. And as always, it's never God's fault. So Adam and Eve, and what happened with them, not God's fault. What happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, not God's fault. What happened with why God had to save Noah and just a few of his family folks and 2 of each living creature that they could get in the ark, not God's fault. All of humanity facing some kind of ultimate judgment, right? A looming hell, never God's fault. Because all of this is because the first humans, Adam and Eve, were bad. Stick with me, folks. I told you sometimes this, when we cross sacred boundaries, it can feel a little uncomfortable. It can feel a little threatening. It could feel almost heretic. But stick with me for a moment. So all of this is because the first humans were bad. They brought sin into the world. Maybe you have some theologies that even goes back further than that. When this prince in heaven, this angel in heaven, came to be known as Satan and was thrown down into the earth, and thus what caused the darkness to cover the face of the earth. Oh, we can go on and on. The bottom line is it wasn't God's fault. And in terms of man coming into the earth with this inborn stain on his soul, wasn't God's fault. And, you know, we were bad. The first humans were bad, right? So we're all bad. We all start out separated because Adam and Eve brought sin into the world. Therefore, this theology requires that every human being can only be rescued from this ultimate looming judgment by the grace of God. The grace of God. Now, the grace of God can only be granted through an extremely specific way. Well, really, one specific way. You know, it depends on your faith. I mean, we're talking about Christendom, is what I was raised in, what most of you are probably familiar with. So you've been taught there's one specific way, one way to obtain this grace. You must come the right way, say the right words, embrace the right deity, right? So again, in case of Christendom, that would be Jesus. Because all of this, when you come the right way, that specific one way, and you say the right words, you embrace the right deity, you secure right standing with God. These are the requirements set forth. And as I shared last week, if there are requirements to be met, then what happens if the requirements are not met? There must be a final arbiter, right, of this, a final judge. And if the Creator was the one who established and gave the requirements, then it is logical that this same Creator must also be the one who decides if the requirements were or were not met, and then apply the appropriate or corresponding response or judgment. The God of judgment, dealing with a sinful people, must then, of course, have a system of judgment to make the necessary determinations, to make the necessary judgments. So not only are we dealing with this idea of a God of judgment, but there must be a system of judgment through which this God operates. It is this system of judgment that even under the New Testament sacred canopy of grace, that we are under grace, but it is this system of judgment that even under grace, because, you know, people like to say because I start with the Old Testament, because I want to address the full canonical text that's within Christendom that we look to, called the Bible. So you've got to start with the entire text, but many times people say, well, that was the Old Testament God. That was the Old Testament God. We're now under the dispensation of grace, and so apparently that means something different. Apparently that God doesn't operate the same way this God operates, because now we're under grace. And I want to challenge that. because that's not how it is in practice. It might be what we think that we want to believe and hold on to, but in the practice of Christianity, in the practice of the laws, and yes, Christianity has laws. Judaism is not the only religion that has laws. Christianity has laws. Christianity has specific requirements if you are to be a Christian. There's a certain archetype that is laid out for us, and the biblical text is used to support that. So this system of judgment, even under grace, even if you chose the right religion, said the right words, embraced the right God, and secured right standing with God, you still continue to live under it. You still continue to live within this system of judgment. We live under an active system of judgment. You know, years ago, I heard a leading minister proclaim, God is not mean, but he is dangerous. God is not mean. God is love, you know, but he is dangerous. Don't mess with God. In other words, remember we talked about failure, you know, requirements and failure and needing to qualify when we spoke about the God of requirements last week. If you don't listen, go back and hear it. It's good stuff for you to look at. So in other words, what this minister was saying is that failure to meet requirements produces dangerous and dire consequences for us. Both personal and planetary disasters have been used as evidence to validate this God of judgment. You know, a recent poll taken by the Associated Press, listen to this, found that 63% of religious Americans, 63%, those who said they believe in God, and we're talking about born again, Protestants, Catholics, you put them all in one box, those who say they believe in God, religious Americans, also 63% also believe that the novel COVID-19 coronavirus is a sign from God telling humanity to change its ways. 31% of those said they very strongly believed it. And an equal number said they somewhat strongly believe that COVID-19 was indeed a sign from God telling humankind to change its ways. But it's not just the coronavirus. It was the AIDS epidemic, right? Definitely. This is God at work. This is God's judgment upon humanity for what? For homosexuality. And then it became a little convoluted with the HIV because then, you know, people who weren't homosexuals were getting the AIDS virus. And so it was like, okay, we still kind of see it as God's judgment just for not living in a godly way. So it's the, you know, you have the coronavirus, you have AIDS, you had the H1N1, hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, personal misfortunes are all seen by many religious leaders and followers as God's response to individual or the collective misbehavior of the human race. This system of judgment is powerful because even if no one else is judging you, you are judging you. You make demands on yourself based on what you believe is required. And when you fail, you pass judgment on yourself. What happens with that? See what happens with that? And I've heard it. This is not anything I'm making up. I've been in ministry for over 25 years. I mean, like full blown in ministry, been exposed to a whole lot. And I myself, who literally lived that experience, understand that when that happens and you have that judgment, because if you came here with that inborn reality of being stained, and even though you're under grace, there's still requirements that you got to live under. You know, that system of judgment is still in place. And so here you are now, as you are understanding that there is a God that has already prejudged you. There's already prejudice. You've been prejudged already by God. So you take that same judgment upon yourself. So if no one is even looking at your behavior, looking at what you're doing, you are judging you, making those demands on yourself based on what you believe is required. And when you fail, you pass judgment on yourself. And therefore you see difficult experiences you may be having as a result of your misbehavior, as a result of you falling, as a result of you sinning, right? So you get into a car accident. Oh my God. Yeah, that's because, you know what? Last night I slept with, sister so-and-so. You get laid off from your job. Oh my God. Yeah, that's because I failed in this area. Oh, I have a good one. That's because I didn't pay my tithe. I haven't been tithing regularly. So, yep, that's why I'm experiencing this in my life right now. So everything you're experiencing that's negative, that's coming up, is seen through those lenses, goes through that judgment process first. What did I do? How did I displease this God? How did I not meet this requirement? I failed. And so you see difficult experiencing you may be having as a result of your misbehavior. And therefore, you must then engage some ritual of penance in order to regain right standing with God and therefore regain God's blessing. It doesn't mean you're unsaved. It just means that, you know what? You and God, you're not in the same space. You're not really connected now. There's a gap now, and you got to do something to get that back, right? So that you can be in God's favor, so that you can experience God's blessing. So we do that to ourselves first. It makes sense. It makes sense when we live under a system of judgment. It makes sense when we accept the idea that we came here with a stain on our souls and we got to work our way back to God. We got to work our way back to connection. When we came here separate, the lack of unity between ourselves and the Creator. And so we got to work ourselves back. So God has already prejudged us even before we showed up in the world. So we do this to ourselves first. It's a costly error in thinking. And then secondly, if you're doing it to yourself, guess what? You're doing it to others. Yep. We judge based on people's religion, their gender, color, sexual orientation. That's a big one, especially in the church. Nationality, or whatever other wrongness we choose to create. This system of judgment allows human beings to play God. And that's what we become. We become miniature gods. We begin to play God. I mean, if you're living under a system of judgment, it makes sense that you take on those qualities. It makes sense that you take on the qualities of the system. So not only are you passing judgment on yourself and consistently living with the threat of failing. And that's why many people, especially when their faith talk, their faith rhetoric doesn't match their lived experience, that there is this disconnect, there's no harmony there. And so, and they feel small on the inside. That's why so many people in churches and spiritual communities and synagogues and temples put on a facade. They show up on Sunday, but that's not them. That's not who they are. No, they cannot be themselves because they understand that there are certain requirements that they must fill. Otherwise, they face the God of judgment. But listen, I said that in my very Centomian accent. Listen, it's not even that this idea of God that they're holding on to is what seems an immediate threat to them. It's those around them. What are the people going to say? How are they going to look at me if they know that I'm actually gay and I'm in the church? What are they going to say about me if they know that I'm actually having issues with my wife or my husband? No. So we walk into church like we're the happiest couple on earth, and we're suffering in silence, all because we feel this is what we have to do to gain God's approval. This is what we got to do to not experience judgment. Yeah. So when you're living under a system of judgment, it allows human beings to play God. So since you are judged by God, you have the right to judge others. It doesn't matter what you say, judge not, you be judged. No. It's a psychological thing that's going on because you're actually operating in that system because you accept that God is a God of judgment. You accept that. And how can I say that so clearly? We accept it because we buy into what we have to do and how we have to come and the right way we have to approach it and the right deity we have to choose and the right words we have to say to even gain entrance so that we can have right standing. Otherwise, there is the ultimate looming judgment. See, and this is why it's so difficult for us to meet each other with true grace. See, grace is not just a word. Grace must be experiential. We've got to experience grace with each other. And this is why when we live under a system of judgment, it is difficult to meet each other with grace. We have accepted a God of judgment and its accompanying theology of sin and salvation, and we live with ourselves and others under this system of judgment. This is why wars exist. This is why the desecration of Mother Earth exists. This is why racism exists, prejudice exists, comparisons exist. This theology, this idea of God has placed us in a trap of our own making. This trap makes us unable to release ourselves from the judgments we have imposed on each other and release ourselves from the judgment we believe God has imposed on us. But I've got good news, right? And yet, because we have devised this trap through the power of our own beliefs, the ideas that we have taken on as truth, the good news is we also have the power to free ourselves. We can free ourselves through the negation of those very same ideas. In this moment of your spiritual journey, in this moment, you are in this moment because your soul has longed for it. You are listening to me right now because your soul has longed for it. In this moment, you have the freedom and responsibility to reconsider what you think about God, to reconsider the ideas that have been given to you about God, to go to the nucleus, to the very heart of those ideas and question their validity. You have that freedom. And I offer you the opportunity, the invitation to walk on, for some of you. Now, some of you have already started this journey and I applaud you. And I say, well done. I do, I celebrate you. But for others, I want to offer you the opportunity to walk on uncharted waters. On this part of your spiritual journey, I offer you the opportunity to let those gods die. The God of favorites, the God of requirements, the God of judgments. Free yourself from the turmoil of reconciling a God of love with a God of favorites, with a God of requirements, with a God of judgments. Free yourself from that. Because the death of God, the death of a God does not mean the death of God. No. And let me tell you, there's so much that awaits you when you let those gods die. Those ideas of God that we've held on. See, it's not the idea that has power. It's not the idea of these gods that have power. It's how tightly we hold on to those ideas that vest those ideas with power. So if you want that idea that you've held on to not have power, release them, because you give them their power by how tightly you hold on to them. You vest them with power. So free yourself from the turmoil of reconciling a God of love with the God of favorites, the God of requirements, and the God of judgment, because the death of a God does not mean the death of God. It means, rather, that you get to engage this dynamic, unconditional, and transcendent goodness. You get to engage in an authentic way, in a true to self way, this dynamic, unconditional, and transcendent spirit. You get to engage in an authentic way, this dynamic, unconditional, and transcendent love. You get to do that. That's the freedom that you're offered here today. This teaching, as with any other that I do, is really not about you learning. It really isn't. It is about helping you to remember yourself. See, because you cannot remember who you really are as long as you believe these gods to be true. Because for most, their choice has been to choose, have chosen. Let me say that again. For most, their choice has been to choose what others have chosen. And when that occurs, right, we relive the cultural and religious stories of our forebearers. We take that on as they did theirs up to multiple generations. And so this is our opportunity. This is your opportunity to be free. So I invite you, and remember what I said about invitation, right? Remember what I said about invitation? Somebody just put in the chat about identity. That's what happens. We take on that identity. We take on that cultural identity that's been given to us, that religious identity, because we relive our forebearers' story, which was their forebearers' story, and the generation before them, and the generation before them. So this transmission of this God that has been transmitted, that was transmitted to them, and then transmitted to us, is what we get to look at and to reconsider today. So this is your first step towards not placing your source of authority outside of you. This is your first step. It is not an invitation to seek another set of beliefs. We're not looking at exchanging one belief for another. This is not the invitation. Rather, it is an invitation to seek an awareness of what you already know. You already know this. You already know this. You are simply being reminded. You are learning, really, if there is a learning, how to remember this truth about you. This is really the invitation that you have, because the day you stop choosing what has been chosen for you will be the moment of your liberation. Let me say that again. The day you stop choosing what has been chosen for you will be the moment of your liberation. And this is part of the reason the real life community exists. I'm getting ready to close. This is, and that's why I love it. That's why I'm excited about it. That's why it thrills me to share this community with so many, because I know there are people who are just like me, who are saying, no, this can't be it. This can't be it. I got to walk in a way where my lived experience matches my faith talk. And that the rhetoric that I'm spewing out is in harmony with my lived reality. This isn't it. Can I envision another possibility for my life? Yes, you can. To quote our former president, yes, you can. And this is why real life exists. This real life spiritual community. We exist to support you in this liberation. And let me give you some gentle reminders as I close. Just remember this. Remember these gentle reminders. God needs nothing. An all-sufficient God. A God who is all means all, requires nothing, needs nothing. Doesn't need you to please God, doesn't need you to do anything for God. God needs nothing. God cannot get jealous. A God who is complete in all cannot experience our human tendency of jealousy. God needs nothing. Remember this. Here's some other gentle reminders as I close. God needs nothing. God has never been separated from anything or anyone. Another reminder, there's enough. Another reminder, there are no requirements to be met. Another reminder, you will never be judged. Another reminder, you will never be condemned. Another reminder, love has no conditions. And finally, the ultimate reminder, you already know all of this. You already know all of this. And if you allow yourself to get in tune with you, it will remind you of the truth that you already know. Well, I do hope that this 3-part series on the death of a God has been a blessing to you. I know it's a lot. And for those of you who are just starting on this process, just starting on this journey, I know it could feel at times that somebody is pulling the rug out from under you, because that has been your safety. That has been what you know, when times get tough, or just in terms of navigating through life, that sense of God that you've held on to. And sometimes that can seem scary when it's being challenged. But let me tell you again, repeat, the death of a God does not mean the death of God. And you get to remind yourself of the truth that you already know. And it's a wonderful, empowering, liberating, dynamic journey. And I'm excited for those of you who are choosing that path. I really am. I really am. And for those of you who are still saying, you know what, I still have some questions, I still don't know, that's fine. That's awesome. Just allow it. Just sit with it. It's not scary. It's okay. It's all part of our life's journey to explore, and it's okay. There's no judgment, there's no condemnation waiting for you. So be at peace, because this is good news, people. This is good news. God bless you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us. I hope that this 3-part series on the death of a God has been a blessing to you. We've talked about the God of favorites, the God of requirements, and closing out today with the God of judgment. And you can go back and listen and listen and listen. And also, starting back up in September, I know it seems like a long ways away, but it's not. I'm going to be picking back up on the creation of the Bible, which will help a lot of you as you're navigating through all of this. It will be very empowering for you. So there's so much richness to be learned. Listen, in the next Sunday, we're going to come back together and we're going to have a time of affirming prayer, just really declaring and affirming and calling the attention of the universe, calling the attention of spirit to what we are declaring. We know that there is no withholding spirit, so we get to make those affirmations and those declarations. So I invite you, it's just 30 minutes next Sunday at 10:30, and we'll come together and have a time of affirmative prayer. And of course, the last Sunday in the month of May is what we call church at home. We do not gather corporately. Rather, we invite you to just have church at home. Create your own sanctuary. Create your own space to connect with spirit, whether it's with yourself, with your family, with the outdoors, Mother Nature, however you choose to do it. Yeah, because church can become so habitual for us. This gets us in a very conscious space to create our own spiritual sanctuary. So that's Church at Home, the last Sunday of man. We have it the last Sunday of each month, and it's a very empowering time. See, that's what makes real life so unique and so geared towards your liberation and your authentic relationship with God. And so I invite you to join us there. And then finally, before I turn it over to Pastor Vanessa to make closing comments, I want to invite you to come back and join us again in June. I am doing another series. I don't know how many parts it's going to be, but I'm doing another series on authentic living. And so I want to encourage you to join us. It's going to be powerful, and it's just going to be a blessing to your life. So we invite you to come back in June as well. So now I turn it over to our associate pastor, Pastor Vanessa Thomas. She has some closing announcements. God bless you all. Thank you for being flexible and joining us. And because we started an hour late, we're not going to have our Real Life Extended today. However, next Sunday, after our 30-minute time of affirmative prayer, we are going to have an extended Real Life Extended, and we can talk about this entire series. So bring your questions, your thoughts, whatever else you want to share in this space. And we're happy to spend that time with you. Pastor Vanessa, I turn it over to you.
Sure.